Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Lunch and Learn session. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll give it just a minute to allow a few more participants to join us, and we'll dive right in. So today marks the first Lunch and Learn session of 2025, hosted by the Climate Bonds Initiative. We're thrilled to have you here as we kick off this year of conversations on climate action, sustainability, and methane abatement. Our topic for today is the new agriculture production criteria, emphasizing methane abatement strategies. We'll be exploring the newly developed agriculture production criteria, particularly focus on this, how can it address emission reductions in agriculture sector, one of the most emission intensive sectors globally. Before we dive into the session, a little bit of what's in store today. This session is all about the agriculture production or the crop and livestock criteria, which is now available for certification under the Climate Bond standard. This criteria provide a comprehensive framework for tackling agriculture emissions, covering areas such as deforestation prevention, biodiversity protection, and improvements in water use and animal welfare. Most importantly, we'll also see how this criteria emphasize methane abatement strategies and align with global sustainability frameworks like the Paris Agreement and the Global Methane Pledge. We're excited to delve deeper into this criteria. How can it support transition to a more sustainable low carbon future? And now I'm pleased to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Reyes Terrado, Agri-Food Standards Lead at the Climate Bonds Initiative. Reyes has been leading the development of agriculture production criteria and is an expert in sustainable agriculture standards. We're fortunate to have Reyes with us today to guide us through this important topic. Reyes, over to you.
Thank you so much, Chris, and welcome everybody to this Lunch and Learn webinar, where, as Chris says, we're gonna go deep into the new agriculture production criteria, emphasizing what are the potential levers that relate to methane. But we will cover the criteria in its whole, in all the different elements that it has, including methane, but also including other elements. And then we will have time at the end for questions, so prepare them. The criteria, as you will see, is quite granular. It has a lot of details and complexity. It is based on science. So today I'm not going to talk about everything, every little detail that is on the criteria. I'm going to highlight some of the main elements with some details, but then there's a lot more to unpack. Prepare your questions at the end, but also there will be more opportunities to engage on this. But yes, please feel free to ask as many questions at the end as you want. We will have plenty of time. So today, I would like to give you 5 main takeaway messages from the new agriculture production criteria, which includes both crop and livestock production. The first one is that agriculture is essential for climate action and for a thriving human civilization. And we'll see a bit more on that. Then, as already mentioned, we're going to focus a bit on what are the methane abatement solutions that come from the agriculture sector. Talking about this methane as an emergency brake to a warming climate, and we will see why this is. Then we're gonna go into more length into the opportunities. So which are the key investment levers that can transform agriculture production, including methane, but also other gases, and including things that can be done on land, a very important point. This is all about criteria elements that can be included in green bonds and other debt instruments as use of proceeds. So the specific interventions that can be included in different financial instruments. Then the four elements that I want to highlight today is the possibility that the criteria brings on screening transition plans. So we have developed in Climate Bonds, together with some top scientists, new science-based emission pathways for 43 commodities that represent 90% of the food we eat. So we're going to see that in a little bit of detail. This is the Excel tool that you can find on the website. So if you also want to have questions about that, you can go now to the website, look for the crop and livestock agriculture production criteria, and there's a link for the Excel tool there with the different emission pathways. This is the big innovation that we have included in the criteria this time. Those are pathways that we have developed specifically for this criteria. So it's quite an element of innovation that we want to share as much as possible with everybody. And then we will end talking about how can the criteria support your transition journey, and what are the different avenues that from here, from having developed the criteria, we can take to make this transition into sustainable agriculture a reality in the world, and seeing a lot of capital going into that. So those are the 5 main elements. We will come back to that at the end. So the criteria has the criteria development. This new agriculture production criteria is an update from a criteria that Climate Bond had developed between 2019 and 2021, but now is in a way, is a much bigger project because it includes also transition plans, the entity element that I just mentioned, but it also has been updated with the latest science and with a very big aim to both incorporate the latest analysis, for example, from the latest IPCC, so it's very heavily based on science. On the other hand, we wanted to simplify it and to make it as practical as possible so that everybody, not knowing anything about the science behind, can see what are the different and very diverse opportunities for transitioning within the agriculture sector. So it was launched in last October in the Climate Bonds Connect conference in London, and we were very happy to also share this launch with friends from different financial institutions and other groups who are also supporting us, but also collaborating in this aim of transforming agriculture to be more sustainable and climate aligned. So I don't know what happens with this thing moving so animated at the title, but that's fine. So before going deep into the agriculture production criteria, as I said, this includes crop and livestock. I just wanted to stop a moment to say that agri-food system is wider than only the production. And in Climate Bonds, we had a program to develop criteria that cover all the different elements within the agri-food value chain. So from the inputs and the land use, going through the farmers, through the traders, the transport, the transformation, and then the so in this very simplified food value chain, we had already developed criteria that will cover the whole value chain, starting with the agriculture production, and this is where we will go in a lot of detail today, but also we had a criteria that is around certifying entities that are deforestation and conversion free in their agriculture business. We are also developing food value chain criteria that will cover those other elements beyond the farm gate. So all the manufacturing, all the food waste that happen after the farm, coming to the consumer, and what different entities can do to decrease the emissions along the food value chain. And then we also have a criteria that is coming to an end. Is actually now in public consultation, and everybody can go into the website and look for these criteria, and there's a questionnaire where you can participate, put your opinion into how you see these criteria could be improved, or things that could be clarified, or things that could be included that we haven't. The public consultation is open until the 7th of February, and this is the alternative protein criteria. So it's a criteria close to this agriculture production, because as we will see, part of the food system is also around reducing the impact from livestock and increasing the health of diets, and that includes in many regions, particularly in over-consuming regions, over-consuming of animal protein, a shift towards alternative protein criteria. So we also have this criteria that is going to be available for certification very soon, in the next couple of months, that will enable investment to scale up and also to make climate proof many of the investments that can go into that particular sector that is growing at the moment very much around alternative protein. So this is just to give you the big picture of where the different criteria around agri-food value chain could be included. But we're going to focus very much in the first part of this value chain. So it's around the farmers, it's around the farming, the agricultural production, and it's also around the inputs and the supporting activities that help the farmers decarbonize. So first point I wanted to make is about how agriculture production has a very big key role in climate action. It is essential for a stable climate and also for a thriving human civilization. It has been before almost like not totally forgotten, but very much hidden in terms of the huge potential it has for climate action compared to other sectors, in part because it's very complex, it's very context specific, and in part because it also has a very big economic implication and livelihood implication. But I think agricultural production mitigation and adaptation elements are now coming into a lot more of the forefront of what we need to start implementing to transition. And we're going to see, I think, and I hope, a lot more interventions and a lot more climate debates around what can be done on agriculture production. I just have some facts there around why agriculture is essential. And this is because agriculture occupies almost 40% of the planet land, which is a very, very big number. And it means that what we do in farming is going to really determine what is the fate of the planet, but also what is the fate of other living creatures in that live in the planet. So it's 40% of the land. It's also about a third of global greenhouse gas emissions. So it's very, very important for climate emissions and for mitigation also. Because it occupies so much land, it's also very important on the impact it has on biodiversity, but also on human health. And we often see pollution and chemical pollution, but also water pollution and water over-extraction from agricultural activities. So again, it's something that is really impactful to all the other human activities that happen on the planet. And then, as we all know, because we suffer food price inflation often, and we see how development is really linked to farming in many economies, it has a very big impact on economy. This can be bad when climate impacts come into effect, for example, but it can also mean a very big opportunity for interventions that tackle the farming sector, including both crop and livestock. So why do we need climate bonds criteria on agricultural production? So one is because of this, because the importance it has on land, on climate, on biodiversity, on human health, and on the economy. But the second is because we wanted to simplify and to have a very clear, practical menu list of interventions that can increase the capital that is flowing into those solutions. And this is why we have make a very big effort to develop this criteria in a way that is as practical as possible. Of course, there's always room for improvement. So we're always looking for ways into how the criteria could be more practical. And I'll get to this at the end, but we're very much open to collaborate to how we can improve and make this more practical. Okay, so we go into methane. Why do I say that methane? Many people say that methane, lowering methane emissions can be an emergency brake for climate. And this is why methane interventions can be very promising solutions to reduce agricultural methane and to reduce warming. Methane is a gas that, when compared to CO2, to the other very big greenhouse gas, It has a it has a much shorter lived in the life in the atmosphere. So it means that after 12 years, it almost dissipates. So then, compared to CO2 that can last in the atmosphere for hundreds of years, the effects is very different. This is combined with a very high warming potential. So compared with CO2, in 20 years, methane has 80 times more warming potential than CO2. And when we compare in 100 years, which is the standard for comparing the warming potential of different gases, that is 27 times. So this makes methane very special, meaning that when we reduce methane, it can have a cooling effect. It is important to note that this is a cooling effect that we are not going to see, because it's the balance between, we will see the balance between warming from different gases, also methane, and then the cooling that will happen if we reduce methane. But it means that it can significantly reduce warming, the warming that is expected into the future, if we're able to cut methane to a level that is significant. This is why in this graph you see how when you compare falling emissions from CO2 and CH4 and methane in the top graph, you see a very different effect on warming. CO2 will continue warming the atmosphere for many years, hundreds of years. Methane will decline the warming very quickly. And this is why the focus on methane is really important, and the focus on agriculture methane is also very important. Why agriculture methane is important? One of the main reasons is that livestock, part of agriculture production, is the largest source of methane emissions in the planet globally. So livestock emits around 31% of all the methane that is emitted. This is a graph from the UNEP report Eye on Methane from 2022. It's followed by oil and gas, and then followed by waste, which includes food waste, but also landfill waste and so on. And then we have coal emissions of methane from coal, and then rice. So from the agriculture sector, we have livestock as the main one. We have food waste, which is a component of that 21%. Not all of it will come from agriculture. And then we have rice. So when we focus on interventions within the agriculture production on methane, livestock and rice become the two more important elements here, and waste to a smaller extent. So when we looked into the latest IPCC report from 2022 that synthesized hundreds of scientific studies to look into which are the more effective mitigation options, the one with the highest potential contribution to emission reduction, we see that those related to methane within agriculture are very important. And those are shifting to sustainable healthy diets, and this will mean reducing animal numbers overall. And then we see reducing methane and N2O in agriculture. N2O is the other greenhouse gas that is very important in agriculture that comes mostly from fertilizers, both inorganic and organic ones. And then in there is also rice. So both reducing methane from both animals and rice become very important in direct mitigation. And then we also have food waste, reduction of food loss and waste as something quite important in agriculture. Within the agriculture production system, this is the element that is called food loss. And food waste is what happens then later after it has left the farm, beyond the farm gate. So the focus will be livestock, rice, and food loss when we talk about interventions on methane within the agriculture production system. So this is a background into why methane is important. What are the main elements that we need to always remember when we are looking for interventions to mitigate climate gases within agriculture production systems? And then we're going to jump straight into what are the interventions, the opportunities that we have defined within the new agriculture criteria. A criteria, really, the way I understand a criteria for certification, but for financial interventions, is like a menu of strategies for depth. So investments that need could go into an agriculture production system for a transition. The farmer or the agriculture corporate want to see what can I include in this transition. And then in this criteria, we provide menu, a very comprehensive menu with many different interventions, but only those that are really credible on science and well established, so that those are very well proven strategies. So we have developed this criteria with this menu of strategies for interventions for either certifying or for screening different debt and financial instruments. This we call in the criteria roads to certification, because are the different avenues that issuers, the applicants, the people who are going to be applying these into the field can then pick and choose which interventions are particularly effective in their context or in their business scenario. So we have 4 main different strategies, routes to certification that we have identified. The first one is about reducing greenhouse gas emissions directly, and this includes what we just mentioned around methane, but also the other gases, N2O and C2O and CO2. The second route to certification is sequestering carbon in agriculture soils. This is a very important one and one that is very, very promising. Then we have the third route, which is around adaptation to climate risks. So all the different interventions that farmers could do to prepare and build resilience into the farm systems. And then the fourth one is the supporting activities for this transition, for this climate transition. Those supporting activities enable both the mitigation and the adaptation within the farm system and can be quite diverse. This is the criteria for defining bond instruments. So basically structuring what are the different elements that can be part of the use of proceeds that come with a bond or with a debt instrument. You can pick and choose all these different levers or interventions. And in the criteria, we have included also one precondition and one post-condition, if you like, which is the precondition is that the land where the farm is taking place should be free of deforestation and conversion of natural ecosystems. This is very important for climate, also very important for biodiversity and conservation of the living planet. And then the post condition, if you like, is that safeguards. So we need to make sure that the different interventions are not doing harm on a series of environmental and social aspects, including adaptation and resilience to climate, and then biodiversity, water, quantity and quality, animal welfare, and social aspects. And this, I will not go into a lot of detail, but it's just a do not significant harm check to see that these interventions will not have negative impact on environment or social. Okay, so going, just illustrating this menu. So this is again the same, but instead of showing only the 4, below these 4 big umbrella routes of certification, there's many different options that can be picked into this menu. So you see the diamond in the middle will show the different interventions, reducing emissions, sequestering carbon, adapting to climate, or supporting activities. And then in each of those, there's again a menu of different interventions that can happen. And we're going to see them now into some detail, but of course, there's a lot more into the criteria paper that we can go through. So the first route is around mitigating greenhouse gas emissions from agriculture production. As we have been seeing, one big element is methane, and in there we have interventions around livestock and rice. Then we also have N2O emissions, mostly related to fertilizers, both in crop and grasslands. And then we have other gases, CO2, so there's also interventions related, for example, to renewable energy or to precision agriculture to increase efficiency and reduce emissions, or fertilizers and so on. Within methane, we have the ones related to livestock that we're going to see in a minute, and then we also have the ones related to rice. Emissions of methane in rice can be quite important depending on the context, particularly in Asia, obviously, where there's a lot of rice cultivation. So it is an intervention that could really have a very significant impact and could be widely applied to a lot of different agriculture production systems where they grow rice, which can be very important in many regions, as I said. So going more specifically into the livestock interventions, there are mostly two ones in relation to methane. And they're related to, you see on the color square here, related to reductions in the size of the herd, and then research and development on alternative measures that can be applied to reduce emissions within the animals themselves. And the reason why we have this reduction in herd is that in all 1.5 pathways for agri-food, you find reductions of animal herd as one of the main mitigation options. This is translated into healthier, sustainable diets in some of the IPCC reports, but you see a lot of the signs, both because of the reduction on gases is very important, and also because deforestation is very much linked to expansion of livestock operations. So it is really important that we consider this as one intervention that in one side is going to reduce emission, in the other side is going to reduce pressure on land so that we can use that land for carbon sequestration, for biodiversity conservation, and so on, and also for food security to expand agriculture where it's needed. And in the criteria, you will see that there's some restrictions on livestock activities, particularly on green bonds and use of proceeds. And it's mostly that the most intensive livestock operations are not eligible. And this is defined in the EU Industrial Emission Directive. Those are very big numbers. So it would be the very big, very intensive livestock operations that they could be part of this if they apply interventions to reduce the impact they have either on numbers or in emissions, direct emissions. Okay, so then we go into the route number 2, which is around carbon sequestration in soils. And there's a big set of different options under 5 big categories, which is around restoration of degraded lands. We have a very big, that has a very big carbon sequestration potential, and this is something that should be happening right now on a very big scale. Then agroforestry, which also has a very big mitigation potential in terms of how much carbon can be sequestered in the soil with these interventions, in the soil or in the biomass. Agroforestry is also is defined as including trees in cultivation of crop or grasslands, and it has a very big potential to increase or maintain soil. Application of biochar is also included in those interventions, and then different management activities that increase or maintain the carbon stock in both cropland and grassland. And the sequestration potential, as I said, can be very high, and it's between the range of 0.2 and 0.4 tons of carbon per hectare per year. And this is kind of a minimum value. There's a lot more that can be done. And for example, agroforestry has a minimum of around 0.5. This not only has benefits for carbon sequestration and climate, but also for soil fertility, and importantly for preventing erosion and increasing water retention in many ecosystems. Okay, that carbon sequestration one is a very big bucket where I just mentioned a few, but it's one that is really very promising and is attracting a lot of attention. And things like, I'll go back, things like, for example, that attract a lot of debate around regenerative agriculture, for example, will be included here. We have on purpose made the criteria output-based, so it's practice-based with a clear outline on the outcome that we will need to see. And this is why regenerative agriculture, rather to put it as a very wide term that can include many things that sometimes are vague or imprecise, those are included as the practices themselves, and that would include many projects that deal with regenerative agriculture. Okay, the third route of certification would be adapting to climate change. And within here, we also have many interventions related to water management and irrigation, weather warning systems, forecasting, and then cultivars that are more resilient to the climate impacts that we see, and then a whole set of measures around training and capacity building. The fourth route, I go quickly, but adaptation and resilience is, of course, very important. And any intervention that we have seen on these four routes of certification can be combined. So it doesn't mean that it's one or the other. Issuers can pick different elements from this menu and combine them as more effective in the specific business or context. The route 4 is around supporting climate transitions, so enabling mitigation and adaptation. And in here, again, there are many interventions around research and development, often with levers or measures that maybe need more research and development to be completely proven in how they need to apply and what is the potential they have, but also other initiatives that go around climate services, for example, servicing the goal of deforestation, for example, satellite imagery and things like that. So this is, again, a very broad menu where many different interventions could be applied. So these four strategies, these four routes of certification with many details behind, is the whole set of criteria for use of proceed in bond structuring and asset certification. So it means that it can be the whole production unit in some of the interventions. It can be the machinery and the infrastructure and the equipment that is needed to implement those activities at the farm level. Before going into the next point, I just wanted to point that as detailed as it might seem, the criteria process was really one of simplification. And we have been working, are very grateful to the support and collaboration of the different members in the technical working group. Criteria, just a reminder of how criteria is developed in this standard way, is climate bonds lead the development of the criteria, but the criteria is really determined and established by collaboration with top experts from around the world that know very much detail about the specific interventions. They have a great body of experience and expertise on the different elements, and then we come together and define what are those interventions and how can we define and simplify them to the maximum. And this is how we feel that we have come up now translating this complex science into practical, actionable practices that can be implemented. So I just wanted to highlight how this is developed. It's a process that took us more than a year, and that is really now starting to go into the real world after this long process of thinking and determining how can we bring this to the market to create big opportunities for agriculture producers. Okay, so the fourth point I wanted to make is around the ability that the criteria gives to screen transition plans for entities and sustainability-linked debt instruments. Those are different from use of proceeds from the asset because they're not specific on single concrete interventions or a set of those interventions. Those are transitions of the whole entity, or the debt linked to the transition of the whole entity, meaning that it includes all the gases, all the emissions that come from the operation of a farm. In this case, it will include the land emissions, the emissions from the inputs, and the emissions from the farming itself. And to do that, to be able to screen those transition plans, we developed emission pathways for 43 commodities in crop and livestock, which are covering 90% of the food we eat. We have done that through collaborating very intensively with Dr. Joseph Poor, who is a top expert on carbon footprints from different food elements. And we have developed this Excel tool, which is available on our website, where you can see the different pathways up to 2050 of the different commodities, looking at the different gases that are implicated in each of those commodities. Can be CO2, can be methane, can be N2O, and you see how they will need to reduce up to 2050 to be able to align with 1.5. So is a big innovation into the standard and the criteria, because it includes not just a single pathway, but all these pathways that are specific for the different crops and different livestock, and it also includes our aquaculture. It is the Excel, just I wanted to put a screenshot for you to see. It has different data sheets where you can see the different crops, wheat and maize, for example, on this screenshot, for all of them, and then the different sources of the emissions with the different gases. It can be CO2 from land use change, or it can be N2O from the fertilizers, or can be methane from enteric fermentation. In this case, it will be zero because wheat doesn't have that. But it's just for you to see that this is available to support the screening of those transition plans. Okay, and then coming to an end, and just expecting many questions, how can we in Climate Bonds support with the criteria the transition journey of different entities and different players into this space? Not only the entities who are doing agriculture production, but also maybe the financial institutions that are supporting this, or development banks, or international bodies who are trying to support this transition with big farmers, medium farmers, small scale farmers, and how can we really all together collaborate to bring this opportunity to fruition. And I just wanted to mention here that we work to create credible scale within the debt market through the criteria, which is practical, credible, science-based guidance. And then once we have developed the criteria, we also, when we work with different countries in defining the taxonomy, which is these policies that define what is a green investment or not, we bring these analysis and these and the different elements within the criteria to try to incorporate that into the different taxonomies that then should align as far as possible with these different standards that are out there. And we also do technical assistance in different teams we have within Climate Bonds to, again, try to bring the criteria and the learnings from the criteria into advice and further work that can be done to apply the criteria to smallholder farmers, for example. This is something that we have been doing and we will continue to do with the Food and Agriculture Organization in Asia, for example. We're also working with different financial institutions to see how can we incorporate some of these into frameworks that they are developing. And then the final goal of the criteria is to get to certification, meaning that the different agriculture producers can certify either their bonds and the use of proceeds, or the whole entity and the whole sustainability linked debt as 1.5 aligned or transition. And then those will have a label that can prove that they really have gone through this process of defining very precisely how these investments are green. And then I just wanted to highlight that, yes, so we support with this criteria the screening of portfolios, of transition plans, of frameworks or develop frameworks, and we do case studies with this criteria to see how can we learn also, and how can different entities learn how to apply this into the practical world, and how can we make these opportunities for investments as practical and as credible as possible. My last slide is the next one, where I just wanted to conclude. Two main learnings from today would be the opportunity that agriculture production brings, which is very immense in terms of mitigating climate gases and adapting to it. It is complex also, and it has a lot of granularity. But acting early can be a win-win-win for climate, biodiversity, and the economy and human health, well-being as a whole. So really hoping that these criteria will contribute, together with many other initiatives that are going on, to bring agricultural production to the forefront of climate action. And then, again, the criteria can support in two main things. One is identifying these promising opportunities targeted to the context and the business case of different scenarios. And then the second is through certification and through applying the criteria, facilitate the access to green capital when those financial instruments are aligned with the criteria. So looking forward to hearing from you now or into the future when you write an email, but open to any questions, Chris, that the audience might have.
Yeah, actually, we already have some questions. So the floor is open, still open. So feel free to type your questions into the chat. But we already have quite few questions here. The first is, how does reduction in herd affect food security?
Okay, that's a very good question. And I think I mentioned that this is particularly targeted to regions or landscapes where there's overconsumption of animal protein. So it's really in those contexts where substitution or reducing or some of those animal protein consumption can bring health benefits. I want to also say that the criteria, I didn't mention it here because there are too many elements, but the criteria includes one automatic eligible intervention, which is around increasing productivity. And this is particularly targeted to vulnerable contexts where, for example, food security might be an issue, and where any intervention that can increase productivity also in livestock systems can be automatically eligible if it can demonstrate that it's really for the food security of the local community. So it is an important question, and we have included that nuance to address those problems in some regions.
All right, perfect. And related to that question from Anish, what does reduced livestock herd mean for a farmer, or what exactly are we asking to finance or finance here?
Yeah, again, a very good question. And so the criteria is defined mostly thinking in big operations. So it's not really thinking about a smallholder farmer who has, I don't know, maybe 50 heads of cattle or something like that. It's really thought about big agriculture conglomerates who could diversify the operation. So, for example, reduce, if they have, the business is based on 50% cattle production, 20% some fruit production or grain production, is thought about diversifying further. So maybe reducing the amount of livestock part of the business and increasing, diversifying in other production systems that have lower climate impacts. So that's one. The other intervention that could happen is around reducing emissions from fertilizers, for example, or research and development. Remember, this is for big, it's thought about big agriculture producers, is around research and development on specific interventions that could be feed additives that could be proven to be safe for consumption, safe for the animals, and effective in methane mitigation, for example. So I don't know if it answered the question, because the question I feel is specific to a small scale farmers, perhaps, or farmers. But yeah.
It's related to the other question of Lawrence, for the considerations for applying this criteria to industrial versus small scale. I think it's related to that question as well.
Yeah, those questions are very important, and of course it's a gap that the criteria has, in the sense that the criteria has a mandate to work for financial instruments. So it's really about bond or other debt instruments and about the transition of big entities. Of course, we want to also make it applicable to other contexts, including smallholders. And this is something that we're going to be tackling this year. we're working in collaboration with FAO, for example, to try to see how this will shape in Asia in different contexts, but it will require further work, and we're looking forward to being able to address that. Yes.
Mhm. And another question from Youssef, question regarding Route 4. I think this is regarding the support
Developing
climate.
activities.
Yeah, would be building green capacity in developing economies or ecosystems, such as financial institutions, can be accounted for, and how can this be measured?
How can this be? Sorry, I didn't hear the last part.
Um, would building green capacity in developing economies, such such as for financial institution, can be accounted for, and how?
Ah, yeah, so I think it might. Here on this graph, there's only on this blue square, there's only some of the interventions. We have others who could be around, for example, increasing capacity on GHG accounting or increasing incorporation of these initiatives in frameworks. Could be one. It's an interesting idea. I'm not sure if it could be specifically part of the criteria, like developing those frameworks, but it's something that where the criteria can really collaborate in supporting the development of those frameworks in different financial institutions. So it's something we can talk about. A very good idea. So yes, get in touch.
All right, thank you. And from Alberto, how different are these emission pathways with the ones produced by the SBTI? And another question that Alberto has is this criteria been tested with real food and agri companies?
Yeah. Again, two very good questions. So SBTI has pathways that are they have 8 commodities, and the general pathway is on absolute emissions. So it means reduction of X%, 20% by 2030, 40% by 2050, things like that. The criteria we have developed is emission intensity. So is greenhouse gas reduction per kilo of production. It incorporates then the absolute emission reduction with carbon sequestration, so that they should also reduce emission as overall. But the main difference with SBTI is that first, we include more commodities. Second is emission intensity, food, greenhouse gases per kilo of food. And then it's specific to the different commodities. So those are the main difference for the SBTI. The second question was around, sorry?
If it has been tested, this criteria.
Exactly. So tomorrow we're having some meetings around this and looking for stakeholders who would like to start testing this with real world data. So it's something that we have very much in the work plan for this year. If you have ideas or potential case studies, we're very much looking forward to hear from you.
And the final question from Lawrence, is the other one was already answered a while ago regarding small scales. Do you have any examples of bankable projects for reducing herd sizes?
For
Reducing herd sizes.
we don't have in the real world yet, but for example, things around research and development of alternative proteins is something that, as I said, we will have the alternative protein criteria to complement this one, but it's something that we're seeing more projects that are bankable around diversifying into alternative protein. So there's one. I'm looking forward to seeing more on the light of what I said earlier. So for example, diversifying and including other interventions, for example, imagine you have a very intensive cattle operation in a piece of land. It could be around buying more land, reduce the number of animals, extensify and plant trees. So then you are combining with agroforestry, you are increasing carbon because you are planting trees, but also increasing carbon in the soil, and you are reducing the number of animals. It can be an income generating business case if there's more premium for the product, but also if we are including other elements like credits for biodiversity and things like that.
Okay, so for our closing question, I think what are the key benefits of being certified under the agriculture production criteria?
Yeah. So it is a very important question also. And we always say that there are two main important benefits. One is maximizing your green credentials. Our criteria is really science aligned, very much 1.5 aligned. So very ambitious. So it will really flag that that entity in particular, that financial instrument from that entity is really green, without doubt of greenwashing or on being, vague on their targets, which is a problem we often face, where there many communications around targets or around interventions, which then when you look at the details are not really that green. So the first is really maximizing the credential. And the second is attracting more investors. When it's labeled as green, we usually see in the market there's quite a lot of interest from investors to have this type of projects. So those could be the two main benefits.
Thank you so much, Reyes. So as we wrap up, I just want to thank everyone again for joining today's Lunch and Learn session. A special thanks to Reyes, of course, for the excellent presentation and for answering our so many questions. Super engaging discussion. And to all of you for your time and participation, thank you so much. We've recorded today's session and we'll upload it to the Climate Bonds YouTube channel, so you can check it out there soon. Thank you again, and we look forward to seeing you at our next session. Thanks,
Thank you,
everyone.
Chris. And thank you, everybody, for the questions. Looking forward to more. Bye.
Thank you.